Professor Brassthorn, your presence is hereby summoned by the Church of the Silent Court to appear immediately, tonight. On the 5th stage of the moon, this year rotation of our heavenly gear, one steam freight ticket has been enclosed and all arrangements have been accounted for you. Your train will disembark at 10 o'clock. A plague doctor of your specialized skill is required. Bring all appropriate equipment and appear promptly. You will be in violation of your contract of any action diverting your appearance. We are always watching you. May the gear of heaven turn to your grace. Signed, the blotted crest of a dead man. I do my best to hide my disdain from the holy policeman who looms over me in my doorway, presenting me a summons. I tip my top hat and close the door, knowing he is standing out there waiting to escort me out of my makeshift apartment turned laboratory. I live in the land of steam, during a time known as the Calibration, a time of religious insurrection and scientific incredulity. The war of gods and machine waging in the corners of the minds of every modern philosophy. I've managed to find myself amongst schools of thought that just barely keep me from being persecuted for my scientific endeavors. All I want to do is find a cure, and spend a night in my life where the smell of rotting souls doesn't fill our hearts. I am a plague doctor in the time of great technology, yet a pariah who wanders the outer banks of the cities. I keep the books of the dying for the church, and research a means of loosening the spiritual hold of the wretched institution known as Heaven's Gear. I know what they want. Summons like these can only mean one thing. A priest of higher ravenous clutch has fallen to the plague, and they have sent for me to sustain him until some political holistic dredge has finally seeped. And I have been dispatched to the Church of the Silent Court, a place where they've sabotaged, tortured, and killed innocent people in their church turned castle of law. A cathedral harboring an ecstasy of fear forgotten by the obtuse and broadly timid minds of modern thought, forcing myself to disembark to the very epoch of lingering folk tales and superstition. And yet they send for a plague doctor, as if I'm to lend some sort of orthodox scientific appraisal upon a wretched holy man's soul. Unfortunately, what resides in the bottles and syringes of my work will do little to quell what infects this priest. The plague is indeed something more than a simple infection. It is a vile demigoddess who spreads madness and suicide in her smoldering, putrescent wake. Raped from a bizarre netherworld outside our petty sensorium, we can only twitch in festering morbidity under the spell of her feverish kiss. When you have seen the dead as I have, you begin to undermine your best scientific speculation and slowly begin to concede the fervent ramblings of the plague-ridden dissidents. You begin to question your sanity as the whorish creatures sniffing out their prey from fathomless darkness begin to show themselves in the corners of your splintered sight. The darkness beckons your death, a poise before the overture of endless suffering. In a time where misery isn't the exception, it's the commonality of our era. I gather my tools, bottles of glowing elixir, syringes and saws, a jar of mechanical leeches, small books on demonology and spiritual anatomy. I bind them up in my apothecary case and shut off the lamp. A shepherd's crook bearing a lantern with an electric candle casts a flickering orange light on my plague mask, the symbol of inevitable salvation or sorrow. Inside the beak resides a sophisticated respirator with holistic herbs of futility. I fasten it to my head tightly. One last look at my dwelling. I take a moment to do something that is between a prayer and a silent scream, to no god nor government in particular. It feels like spiders are scratching around inside my mask. Lowering my shroud, I open the door and the holy policeman covers his mouth with his arm, gesturing me down the long hallway. Quick, fleeting glimpses from other rooms soon turn to door latching and muffled whispers of sin. I tense my leather gloves around the crook and case. I feel like I'm falling. The crescent moon recedes behind a massive military zeppelin. As it passes the moon, it has already vanished into the industrial smog of the land. By the time I make it to the train yard, the policeman has already vanished. I had forgotten he was even there. The ticket taker refuses to handle the ticket I offer, applying gloves and cautiously looking me over as she finally accepts the ticket, only to swiftly thrust it into a nearby jar of vinegar. One last fleeting glimpse of her, I realized how tense she appeared, like an overwound watch, though not from fear of my presence. After I board, I look out the window and I see her exhale and relax into a frown. She was holding her breath. The trip over the countryside is a blur of orange, cloudy memories. I try and steady my nerves as the landscape dissipates and industry trudges away into the darkness of periphery. No longer a dabbler in medical arts, I've become something of a new title. Perhaps I'm a metaphysical detective, fringe scientist, occult curist. All my rationale falters, only to end in one word: hypocrite. I step off the train and take in the churning sprawl. Long gone are the over-industrialized districts of society. They have given way to the foregone souls of outer limitation. Peddlers set up shop on the platform, hawking tinctures and spirits, false vials of refined aether. Airship pirates who've jumped ship, muscling around as they wait for new work. Urchins, offering whatever menial talents they can for a piece of soured bread. Nightmen carrying mechanically assisted tubs of human waste to the far-off dust yards. Automata prostitutes posturing before the pimps of their perverted makers. Signs of the nearby freak shows displaying those who've survived the wretched rigors of scientific exploration. Purveyors of illegal mechanical modifications standing before the crowds, displaying their contorted, weaponized prosthetics. Holymongers offering prayer to the fallen in thinly veiled edifices of propaganda. A homeless corpse being drug off the platform, leaving a trail of pus and blood. I relent in the dismal grandeur of it all. Emblematic are those who've lost all wars and await the cold embrace of the nevermore. The countryside is swathed in soupish green fog. Carrion clings to fence lines of dilapidated farmhouses, until even those are lost into the darkness. I shut off the lantern to conserve power, and let my eyes fully adjust to the dark spectacle. My only means of navigating to the church of the silent court is the faint carriage tracks cutting through the forest, and the subtle rumble beneath my boots of the underground railway leading to the church used exclusively for transporting prisoners and exporting the dead. The burnt forest consumes me. From the tree line I see wafting spirits, and I try with all my might to convince myself that it is simply fog dancing slowly through the reaching branches. I let sorrow overtake my panic, and pretend I am amongst the company of those whom I will join in time. A black bird stands in the path, refusing to move at my approach. Steeling my resolve, I stomp up to the indignant little bird. We stand at odds, and for a moment the black holes where light would give evidence to where the eyes would reside is gone, leaving only pitch dark sockets. I gesture my crook, trying to scare it off. It stands motionless. A rush of new terror overwhelms me. I kneel, placing my case down on the soft dirt, and reach to caress my beak. It suddenly cocks its head to the side, then turns and walks, not fly, but walks into the forest wherein the darkness soon swallows its form. My leathers creak uncomfortably as I rise, dusting the dirt from the bottom of my case. I exhale a quivering breath and continue forth, picking up the pace in a hurried advance. The forest reveals a clearing, and I stand stricken before the church of the Silent Court. A climbing, shadowy edifice that dwarfs all and vanishes into the clouds. Slick, wet walls of jagged black stone, with wrought vinework clawing upwards into the whistling buttresses. I lean on my crook before the gate of twisted iron hanging open listlessly, and try to stay the nightmarish tales from my mind. Tales of the old priestess who threw her newborn baby from the tallest spire. Tales of the clergy who filled wells of blood with their own sacrament to the chortling lips of the lowest gods. Tales of the misty remains of judgment. Heaven's gear, that which turns to the barbarous servitude of cruel feudal tyrannies, shadows under the guise of everlasting light. I turn on the lantern and breathe deep the futile herbs. The large door booms and creaks, and a muted monk bows and extends a white hand with blackened fingernails into the bleak maw. I walk slowly through the vestibule and take note of the stagnant holy baths at the door's entrance of the antechamber. I want nothing more than to wash clean the filth of my countenance. Inside there lies the main desk, with a looming marble statue of the goddess behind it in an intricately carved archway. A goddess with the sun gear on her forehead, swallowing a falling star as she cradles a child who suckles the breast, holding the moon in his delicate hands. Beneath the goddess are serpents like roots, and above tree branches like human hands. The weak lighting of the gas lamps only served to dance uneasing light upon her scratched, polished form. On either side of this enormous statue leads two halls, one to the church hall, the other to the dungeon. I realize this is the last thing most prisoners see before they are thrust into either chamber, and I hope that the monk will lead me into the church hall opening. He does not. The arching path spiraling progressively downward is laden with hooks and round, stout framework used to hang wigs, coats, people. Above our heads is long, shackled railings, created to carry prisoners from one room of foul instrumental torture to the next. At a particular crossing path, there leads to a monolithic device that is both a torture prison and organ chamber, used to affix prisoners to the tubing structure and forced to sing their laments which echoes throughout the church. I clench my teeth, grateful that whatever lowly god exists in this place has spared me that particular oral assault of this evening. The monk drags his robes up to a door and produces a key that thrusts deeply into it, startling me at the sound. As I enter this place, the door is closed behind me, and my heart sinks when I hear the lock is turned. I use my lantern to survey the small room. Inside are more weary gaslights, and I remember that the carbon monoxide given off by these tend to create hallucinations. I almost feel relieved that I have something to blame in case I am affronted with some new grim encounter. On a long table is head boxes with brass plaques of certain representatives, political, religious, military. The age-old tactic of producing one of these boxes to their victim, in the promise of collecting their head to send off to yet another victim of affiliation, has been a powerful gesture of sway within this church to cultivate desired, faith-based initiatives. Nestled in the corner are large barrels of gunpowder, and I snort in surprise at how utterly reckless these people are, keeping these barrels right next to these fragile gaslights. And for an instant, I contemplate sending myself to burning absolution, instead of making my way to the other end of the room, which leads to the hallway of some muted discussion. The hallway opens up into a large octagonal chamber, something akin to a conservatory, a preaching hall, and now a makeshift surgery theater. Resting in the upper seating, I see those dressed in the trappings of all manner of occupation. Butlers, maids, cooks, coachmen, gamekeepers, gardeners, governesses, doctors, lawyers, and fellow clergymen, all whispering and fall silent when they see me approach the center table. On the slab in the middle lies a man strapped down, surrounded by higher priesthood. At once my suspicions were confirmed. This man was a fellow priest, and those in attendance are his homekeepers brought from his lofty estate to foresee their master's suffering under the invisible hands of the plague. A priest bearing the higher crests of this institution approaches me, whispering in his dead language that I need to cure him of all costs, that he has a speech that he must address to the fellow denizens tomorrow, and it is paramount that he perform his duties, as it is paramount that I perform mine. So fearful they are of losing this particular bishop from their grand chessboard. I scowl in discontent, though hidden by my mask. I approach. The other holy ones rise their robes to their faces and back away. I loom over this poor man. He is too far gone. Buboes of drooling pus dresses his robes beneath him. He is purple, and his glands are swollen with filth and scar tissue. His eyes are blood red, and he is chattering with a shivering pain. I look down at the archaic tray of knives, saws, needles, and clamps, hastily wrapped in scripture and emblazoned with holy relics. At my feet, a musty trunk of sawdust nearby, awaiting severed limbs and organs. At his side is a mirror used only to determine if breath is still present in the body. I scoff. This place is stuck out of time, and they flail in the presence of modern healthcare, foreboding the corruption of their backwards-headed purity. His back arches, and he claws at the robes on his table, and a throaty moan begins to erupt from him. The crowd gasps, and he relaxes. I turn away, and the horrible realization rings true. He is more than infected. He is possessed. The vile demigoddess has done what she does best. The plague merely a byproduct of human inability to control her song. I wave a priest over to me. He's beyond my help. If he is lucky, he will die before the sun rises. Rage flickers across the wrinkled man's visage. His dead language lashes out in a whisper. You are bound by contract to help this man. Remember what you are tasked to do. You will help cure this man, or you will, I raise my hand to cease his languishing tongue. I am not here to create miracles. I believe that's your job. The man on the slab arches once more, This time a language unlike any a human should muster bellows forth from his cracked lips. The crowd stirs, with subtle weeping from the rafters. The priest at my side bears a look of both pleading and righteous indignation. "Do something," he says. I bow my beak. Looking at my apothecary case, I managed to speak the only phrase of this dead language I had ever took the time to rehearse. Kustra ikura. Thousands of apologies. I kneel and produce a bottle of glowing fluid and induce it into my long syringe. "What is that?" the priest inquires in a low whisper. "My strongest formula. Years of research leading to what resides in this needle. I call it Necrofessor. What is in here is the only thing that will cure the effects of the plague, with a hefty dose of a painkiller. You have to release me from this chamber. My presence will only sully the ritual." "Ritual?" "Yes. What you combat is something that only the strongest of faith will overcome. Begin your chant of exorcism, and when the moment of climax from your monks is sung, the vile demigoddess will reveal herself. Plunge this into the man's chest, as close to the heart as you can manage. If his faith is strong enough, he will survive the evening. But I must be released from the Church of the Silent Court. She knows I am here now, and will seek to corrupt me next. And this church will fall before night's end if you try and retain me. I am the only one who can combat this at this time. In the morning I will return and reveal all my research notes to your court. Now, release me and begin." I placed the syringe into his hand, his face soured with worry, as the onset of what must be done by him overtakes his countenance. He grabs the syringe and slowly turns back to his order of priests. With a few whispers and gestures of contempt from the other priests, they rescind and open the door leading to the exit hall. As I pass out, the monks begin to take up their chant, and the man on the slab shuffles in agony. The chamber begins to rise in a cacophony of lyrical hums and fervent chatter. The vile demigoddess begins to laugh from the man's throat. My trenchcoat brushes the narrow hall as I begin to race out, the imaginary spiders in my mask scratching around almost as loud as the pounding in my head. Up and further up, I wind my way out of the dreaded halls, back to the antechamber as the door boomed open for my exit. I look at the holy baths in the antechamber once more, as they seem to be boiling. Out in the large door I run, faster and faster through the padded black soil, my heart beating wildly, my blood pumping, churning, broken, flaming glass. I dash into the forest, heavily as my mask compresses and expands my exasperated breath, the herbs floating about inside my beak. I hear a scream unlike any I've ever beheld resonate from the Church of the Silent Court. I escape into the darkness. At the end of the forest line, deep into the countryside, my boots feeling like stone weights, and my mask feeling like a prison, I look out over the soupish fog. I drop my case, fall to my knees, clutching my crook as a final resort from collapsing altogether. It is over, and my lies have secured only a brief reprieve. That man is surely dead, and I imagine a new head box with my name on it now being constructed. I feel a hefty weight in my shame, my goggles fogging from tears. I follow the wrought iron crook up the lantern, now long burned out, and I see an inky black shadow resting on top of the curve. bathed in only the looming crescent moon. It is the black bird. It casts its eyeless stare down on me, then flies away.